Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Namaste Ashish Bhai. Thank you very much for joining us here. Just to give a brief introduction, Ashish Dhar is a mechanical engineer and an entrepreneur living in Delhi. He is the co-founder of Pragita.com, which is an e-learning portal dedicated to Indic knowledge systems. And the purpose of our interview today is really twofold. First, we'll be discussing about Pragita, which Ashish Bhai will be telling us about shortly. And also the topic of the exodus of the Kashmiri Pandits. So Ashish Bhai, before we begin, would request you to give some more additional background about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, I am a Kashmiri Hindu, and I was born and lived the first 10 years of my life in Kashmir. After which, I moved with the rest of the 500,000 people to the fertile plains of India. And I am by education, I am a mechanical engineer, like you said. And I spent a good 7 years of my life in the south of India. First for my education, and then 3 years I was working there. And so I have I've sort of lived in the northernmost part to the southernmost part of India. So I've covered pretty much the whole territory and absorbed a lot of influence from various parts of this geography. So why? I mean, mechanical engineering I just chose to do because I was, I didn't know any better. I didn't know what to do with after 12th, like most of the people that I know. And halfway down my engineering, I realized that I took up mechanical because I was in love with physics. And then I asked myself, why is it that I am actually doing engineering? I should have taken up physics. But then it was too late. So I thought I might as well complete this and see where it goes. and then after that, I worked in the industry for engineering industry for 8 years before I started my own company, which was an adventure travel company. And then finally, this is the latest thing that I've done. I started Pragita a couple of years back.
So could you tell us more about the inspiration and the inception of Pragita, what it is and how you envisioned it?
Yeah, so Pragita is basically it's a platform for talking about and for sharing knowledge about the Indic tradition and whatever originates in India, whether it is art forms, whether it is philosophy, whether it is one of the darshanas, whether it is any of the spiritual practices. So I can't really claim credit for envisioning it, because like most of the good things that happened in my life, this also happened by accident. It was that we were just my ex-boss and we were discussing about temples and the architecture of temples, and he was because I was back then I was in the travel business, so he said that he wanted to do something which is related to temple tourism. And while we were discussing, I told him that a better thing to do would be, rather than get into this tourism business, it would, I mean, if you really want to do something about Hinduism and for or for India, we should rather focus on the cultural aspects and do something about spreading knowledge about these various intellectual traditions and spiritual traditions of India and art forms, of course. So as the conversation kept happening, the idea kept evolving, and finally we decided that it is ripe enough in our minds to take a plunge and do something about it. And that's how Pragita was born. The idea, I mean, like I said, it just happened by accident. But if I look at the seeds of the idea, it basically come from the fact that because I spent the first decade of my life in Kashmir. And when I moved from Kashmir to Delhi, schism in the way in which things were done in Kashmir as opposed to how they're done in Delhi. First of all, there was this difference in the size of the cities itself. I was in Srinagar, and then I moved to a metropolitan like Delhi. But more importantly, Kashmir was a sort of a cocoon, and most of Kashmiri Hindus, one, because it was geographically an isolated valley, and two, because we were under siege. We were in a place which was under Islamic invasion. For it had been under Islamic influence for a long time. So therefore we held on to our tradition more closely and more more fiercely, and therefore we were closer to our roots than I saw how an average Delhiite was. And so that schism sort of uh, when I grew up and I looked back at it, I thought that there's such a huge difference between how a traditional Hindu looks at uh, looks at the world and how the more secularist Hindu looks at it. And so I thought that this is a gap that is um, asking to be addressed and asking to be bridged. And so that is perhaps how this thing sort of germinated in my head.
That is very interesting that you mentioned that when the Hindus were feeling more isolated, they tended to hold on to the traditions even more strongly. There's actually a interesting parallel in psychology, or sociology rather, where they found that societies which have a little minimal amount of crime tends to get people to value crime-free society more than they would if there were no crime at all in the society. So it almost makes them feel a greater need to uphold the security, to protect themselves, to safeguard themselves from assaults and so on. And it's very interesting to find. And I also see that it's happened a lot to Indians, especially when they become marginalized. There's a tendency to fight back only then, because until then you take things for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a question of identity ultimately. When you are under siege and when you are under attack, you tend to one, of course, hold on to your tradition, hold on to your what defines you culturally, and also find very innovative ways of yet being true to yourself. So that's something that sort of Kashmiri Hindus had sort of mastered. When we were in we used to visit temples, so it was obligatory. When you come out of the temple, you had to remove the tilak and all, because outside, the world would make fun of you, and you'd probably be under direct assault. So that is a telling example of how you sort of still visited the temple. You had your spiritual practices going, but yet on the outside you worked at blending in.
I see. So when I look at the Pragita website, it has a
Yeah.
very similar look and feel to what you would find on Coursera, for instance. And so
Yeah.
when one looks at the way Coursera functions, it gets in touch with various universities and professors, and it hosts their courses. So is this a very similar structure?
Yes, it is. So we started off with the a sort of a blend between Udemy or edX and Coursera, in which we thought that there is a lot of stuff which can happen spontaneously. Like if we go to a tabla teacher, for example, so we assumed that they would be able to create courses on their own because they're teaching students. And so art forms like performing arts especially, it would be easier for us to get content, which was also true, which is why right now also, if you look at the catalog of the small catalog that we have right now, about 40 courses, most of it has to do with art forms. uh, but personally, I was more interested in the philosophical aspects, in getting into the crux of the spiritual lessons and courses. And when I tried to get that type of content onto the site, I realized that the ecosystem is completely broken. There's no way in which I can expect that I will bring this platform to a scholar, and the scholar will be able to use it and to reach out to people with his knowledge, with his or her knowledge. uh, so that was something that I discovered as part of the journey when we developed this. So while we were working on the website, we were designing it, and the coding was going on. At the same time, we were reaching out to scholars, we were reaching out to people who were experts in their various domains. But we realized that, as I said, that there was no way in which this was going to happen spontaneously. So we got into creation of content itself. So we also have the magazine section where people contribute articles and essays and all sorts of original thought based in the Indic tradition. Uh, and we have the courses section where we work with scholars and we help them first structure it for an online audience, and then do all the curation ourselves. We do the editing, the post production, everything, and then upload it onto the website. So the scholar only has to worry about the part of delivering the lecture, nothing else.
So how large is your team that is managing and curating these contents?
Right now, we are just 3 people. One of us is totally into coding and the technical part. The other 2, we have, and we also have someone working for us on a freelance basis. That is a person with a camera, and the rest of the things we do on our own. So it's a very, very small team as of now, which is also why we are finding it very difficult, even though we have all the right people in the network. We have on our board of advisors, we have very respectable scholars. We have Professor Kapil Kapoor, we have Professor Bharat Gupta, we have Jagbir Singh ji, and we have Miss Sonali Hardikar. And they've been very helpful in helping us design and think through a lot of the problems which we wouldn't have been able to envisage, because I am not a scholar, so these guys have been very, very helpful in that. And we have the right people in our network where we can get things done. But because we're a small team, so that's a huge bottleneck. But we are now in the process of raising the next round of investment, and hopefully that should be sorted out soon. And when that happens, you will see hopefully an explosion in the amount of content that we are going to have on the site.
That would be wonderful to see. So I think you've already touched upon who you consider an authentic teacher to be hosted on Pragyata. So I already know your response to this, so I'll ask the question in negative. For instance, what would disqualify the likes of Wendy Doniger or Devdutt Patnaik from representing our knowledge system?
Well, first of all, even if I read half a paragraph by Wendy Doniger or Devdutt Patnaik, just immediately there is no questions asked that this guy is bluffing his way through life. So there's no question of having him. But if I were to objectively analyze it and say that, why not a Wendy Doniger when she is specifically, let's take the case of Wendy Doniger. She calls her version of Hinduism as the alternative version somehow. But that is the mainstream version in the Western academia. First of all, she's not a practitioner. She has no idea what is being said, what is being talked about. And so that a very pertinent point here about Pragyata is that we don't believe that Indic knowledge traditions in the real sense can be transmitted online. So if I were to learn Vedanta, I will have to sit at the feet of a master and get my knowledge. And if I'm worthy, first of all, the master should be able to, should first of all allow me to take refuge. And then, I will, if I'm worthy of it, I will get that. So it's in no sense that, I think that everyone is worthy of it, and therefore this mass channeling of all this knowledge is somehow going to solve all our problems. But our purpose at Pragyata is not to teach Vedanta, for example, but it is to teach about Vedanta. We want everyone to have a clear intellectual understanding of what it is about. The actual journey starts after that. So we want to sort of prime people, into taking that initiative of going and meeting someone, meeting a spiritual master, and then taking on that journey. We want to get people interested in that. And in that sense, Wendy Doniger is of no help at all. No? I mean, that's just a very, very straightforward answer. It's not about this school or that. It's just the fact that Wendy Doniger does not know what she's talking about.
And the person should also be practicing Hindu or whatever that they are teaching. If they are Vedantan, they should be a practitioner as opposed to just an academic.
Absolutely. I mean, you can only talk about things like this. You can only talk about an intellectual or cultural tradition if you are a genuine practitioner yourself. But we don't say that. I mean, if I were to have a course on, let's say Kashmir Shaivism, I need not go to, let's say, someone like Swami Lakshmanju, which anyway, I don't think anyone of that caliber is alive right now in that lineage. So it's not like I have a choice, but I don't need to go to someone at that level. But at least I should be able to go to someone who has a clear intellectual understanding and represents the spiritual tradition honestly at the intellectual plane. which is another way of saying that the person should be a practitioner to the best of his or her abilities.
And even the respect for the tradition has to be there. So many times people look upon it as the other, as the the native savages who teach or who are practicing something who need to be civilized.
The respect for tradition is the very first checkpoint on the list. There is just no alternative for it. I think it's a liberal fact to say that there's this authority, this questioning authority all the time. Authority has a very, very significant role to play in our lives. When your kid, when he or she is growing up, you can only pass on values, you can only teach them with some sort of exercise of authority. People who deny that really don't know what they're talking about. So in the same way, when you're teaching, when your guru is teaching you without exercising authority, which is somehow erroneously equalized to dogma, which is not the case. Authority is different. Authority is the fact that there is a difference in the level of consciousness of the teacher and the student, and in order to transmit that knowledge, there has to be a respect for that gap. If the student from a lower standpoint starts questioning the teacher all the time, then there is no genuine transfer of knowledge possible at all.
Yes, you're right about that. That in the current liberal education or so-called liberal education, people talk a lot and focus a lot on skepticism. But in our tradition, we focus upon Shraddha, that you give the benefit of the doubt to the Acharya that perhaps I have understood something wrongly as opposed to you have taught it incorrectly.
Oh, absolutely. My guru, he was he was a Shakta, a worshipper of Shakti, back in Kashmir, and he also had a very special vidya of Ayurveda, and therefore when people came to him for getting cured or for any problems as such, the very first thing that he told them was that unless you have Shraddha, nothing is going to work. And he was extremely powerful as a tantric, and yet he couldn't break that barrier of if someone did not have Shraddha, then it wouldn't work with him.
Very true. As the Gita says, Shraddhavan labdhe jnanam. So if you don't have Shraddha, there's no knowledge. That's a very, very pertinent point. And so, with regards to the byline of Pragyata, which is learning the Indian way, you may come across many arguments by people where they would, the so-called secular elites in India would cast doubt about what it means for learning or for knowledge to be Indian. And they may also question the need to know about our own traditional knowledge system in this globalized world. So how would you respond to such doubts?
First of all, the byline that we have, learning the Indian way, has sort of two connotations to it. One is, of course, the more obvious one, which is learning the Indian way, which is there is this Indian way of living, which is also called the dharmic way of living, and you sort of learn that way by getting acquainted with what we are sharing on Pragyata. And secondly, there is the learning, the process of learning the Indian way, which is what we were just talking about a while back, in the sense that you have to have respect for authority, you have to have respect for tradition, and you have to know your humble place in the world before you start embarking on any journey of learning. So both these are applicable to this byline. Coming to your question about the secularist elites, I think I've spent a reasonable amount of time over this struggle, and I think that beyond a certain point, trying to convince the secularists of any of these things is counterproductive, because we waste our energies in trying to make them see reason, in trying to make them see the light. Beyond a certain point, that is just a waste of time. As long as someone is open to new ideas, as long as someone acknowledges this fact that a lot of gap in the a typical Indian's understanding of his own roots, of his own tradition, as long as someone acknowledges that and yet questions, that is fine. You can have a reasonable conversation, you can talk about these things, you can talk about why this has happened, how colonization affected it, how Islamic invasion, how that destroyed a lot of our knowledge, why we need to reconnect to our roots, what is important about identity, all that you can talk about. But when you're talking about secularist elites, they are just their time is over. In all honesty, I think that by engaging with them, we are unnecessarily wasting time. And whether they agree with what what we are talking about, whether they agree with the fact that Sanskrit is important or not, it just doesn't matter. It's a given that Sanskrit is important. A lot of our intellectual giants, from Sri Aurobindo to Swami Vivekanand to Ramana Maharishi, have attested to this fact, have explained it duly, and I'm nowhere in that league to be attempting that all over again. So I don't waste my time with secularists, and I think that as far as they're concerned, their era is over. The Hindus are seeing a massive resurgence,
Yes.
and it's just pointless to be debating with them.
So as you say, it makes more sense to strengthen our own community and make them strong in their own knowledge system rather than engage the
I,
outsiders.
every single day that goes, we are losing a great scholar somewhere, we are losing a great practitioner somewhere, and with them dies the knowledge itself, because they're the uh, last holders of that knowledge. And that is true for whether we're talking about spiritual practices or we're talking about art forms. Folk art is dying every day, we know. So we have to concentrate all our efforts into getting in touch with them and into bringing them to the public, and to document their work, to be able to preserve this. uh, I believe that, and I don't really know whether I'm absolutely right, but I do believe that right now, the phase that we're going through, is a phase where we need to preserve, and we need to sort of sow the seeds. I don't think that within our lifetimes we will see this tree growing too big. But if we don't do this, a lot of the knowledge will be lost forever, which is something that we can't afford.
Yes.
So what we have to do is that we have to sort of preserve whatever we have right now, and this has to be done for the posterity. We can't hope to see the all the results in our own lifetimes.
No, that's very well said. And it's sad that many of our own people are unaware of the many discoveries we even attribute to Western origin. So, which had already long been discovered in India. Just for example, calculus or the theory of gravity, the Hindu numericals or the numerals, which are now cast as the Arabic numerals. Then there's even the speed of light, which had been approximated by a Sayanacharya. The Pythagoras theorem was actually already in place in India to build the Yagna Kundas for the Vedic Yagnas. And all of these things are already known, and it also completely unknown because our educational system never even alludes to it. So it's fantastic that a portal like Pragreta exists. And the next question will be, how do you engage the minds of people to feel passionate about these great offerings that are already available to us?
Well, one of the things that we were talking about, I think, before we started the session, was the attention span. So I think one of the problems, or the gravest problems, is that of attention span. Some of the things that these knowledge systems entail are heavy cognitive stuff. You have to have great concentration to be able to even appreciate the layers, the topmost layers of it. Not to mention, the deeper parts. So there are various ways in which that can be done. But as I said, that our purpose is to bring people and to get them acquainted with these traditions. So in that sense, our job is easier. We're not the masters ourselves. So our job is easier to get people acquainted with these traditions intellectually, and for that there are various tools. We can do this by bringing in animation, bringing in modern technology, trying to engage people visually through great visual art, through infographics, stuff like that, which is common nowadays over the internet. And we have some great resources also available, like one of our visual designers who we are talking to. He has an amazing understanding of the intellectual traditions, and he's also very good at what he does. So translating that into, for example, an infographic, simply an infographic, if we were to talk about the different schools of the Vedic tradition and how they fit in, I can't really, I can't really visualize it myself, but this person can. So we're trying to bring in a lot of different skill sets to be able to put together a sort of clear visual picture for the for a potential student to appreciate it and to engage with it better. So these sort of tools, the technology that we have available of reaching out to millions and billions of people through the internet, so these are the things which is really helpful.
That makes
And in
perfect
that
sense.
sense, the internet has also been very, it's been a sort of a blessing for the Hindus, because without the internet, I don't think we would have seen this kind of a resurgence.
You're very true about that, and even the whole social media explosion, where we no longer rely upon the fake news or the paid news, or the, as we call it lightly, the prostitutes in India. And I think to a large extent, even this whole resurgence of Sanatana Dharma and the pride that Hindus take is because of social media. So, very rightly pointed out that the internet has played a very vital role in bringing this about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, take for example the Sabrimala case. If we were living in a pre-internet era, and this idiot Trupti Desai and her friends, if they had started this campaign back then, it would have been completely one-sided. Imagine that in the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, they were even writing stuff in national dailies like the Indian Express that there is no temple. I mean, that is the kind of propaganda that was going on. Now with the internet, there is they write one thing, we can write 10 different things countering that. Like this recent thing about this Audrey, what is her name, Audrey Trushk or Trushki, whatever she's called. She writes preposterous stuff about Aurangzeb, but her lies are called out immediately. She still has the backing of the academia and the right contacts in the publishing world for her garbage to be published, and it may even become a bestseller. But the fact is that we have a strong tool in our hand to break that myth that they indulge in.
It's really empowering that we don't need a master's degree in communications from Oxford and get hired by a media channel in order to counter this. Simple engineers like you and I can just write a post and publish it on India Facts or someplace. So it's a great revolution.
These guys hate engineers for that, because engineers are all ways except in engineering. And so just to give you an example, so I am co-authoring a series on caste for Pragyata, which is called Cast in Stone. And when I wrote the first piece with Sonali ji, so we sort of laid out the plan of how we are going to address this issue. How the current understanding, which is called the colonial conception of caste, how it is erroneous, and these are the examples of where they go wrong, and this is how we are going to tackle this issue. So it was only an introduction. We laid no claims. We made no assertions about anything at all. And I shared that. Once it got published, I shared it over Twitter, and there was this handle, presumably a young lady from the Delhi University, who called herself a feminist and all that, and she started abusing engineers because because she said, you have no sense of what sociology is and what humanities is, because of a single line, which is a truism. I did not insinuate anything. I just stated the facts that if I am a physicist, if my claims, if my theory is wrong, I am called out immediately, because there's a very strong peer review. However, in humanities, I can say anything,
Yes.
and yet it travels, and once I am even proved wrong somehow, there is no question of apologizing, or there's no question of stating that I have changed my position on the topic, which is what I had just briefly mentioned. But that somehow got to her, which is, I just got reminded of that because you mentioned that engineers like us can do this, which is very painful for them.
We're taking their jobs away. But even on a serious note, I really like what Rajiv Malhotra says about this, that social science is not really a science, because there's nothing that you can quantify. It's all qualitative, and the guy who has the most power or the most authority, his theory will trump, and everybody else's ideas will be marginalized. So today, if as a Hindu, if I am a practicing Hindu, I go to the temple, I have Shraddha in my Bhagwan and everything else, I will still not be taken seriously on a global platform, as opposed to a complete non-practitioner, somebody who has no respect for the tradition, in the likes of Wendy Doniker. Because I do not have the degree that they hold as required, and the hegemony that they have over the system is something that we are now penetrating. And as they talk about invading the sacred, that we are breaking into the fortress that they've built for themselves.
Oh, absolutely. I think humanities and social science, these are disciplines who have sort of misused this privilege of the freedom of expression the most. Because they have the freedom to talk, say whatever they want, they do it, which is fine. But the problem is that they hold all the power. They have absolute control over the narrative, which common people and the real practitioners don't. And I completely agree with you on that.
So, I'm very happy to see that there's a portal which is catering to our traditional Indic knowledge systems. And I'll just put the link over here, but it's pragita.com. And this is making use of technology, right? So please, I encourage all the viewers to sign up, check out a few courses, and if interested, just do a few more and share it with your friends as well, because we need people like Ashish to promote our knowledge systems, because there are not many people doing that, unfortunately. So I think on that, we can segue into the topic of the Kashmiri Pandits.